Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to continue with Chapter 11, Post-War America, 1945 to 1960. Today we're going to look at Part 2, Science and Technology. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is something you're all very familiar with. The computer. Most of you own a laptop, or have an iPad, or at the very least a smartphone. And your smartphones actually have more computer power, much more computer power than some of the early computers that were built. Now, it was during World War II, wartime research led to advances in computers. One of the problems we had was our American submarines were trying to sink enemy warships, Japanese ships that were traveling on, so we're trying to hit a moving target, 1-2 miles away. So the U.S. Navy developed a electromechanical analog computer small enough to fit on board a submarine, which used trigonometry to fire a torpedo at a moving target. Also during the war, we were trying to break the German submarine codes. The bomb was designed. It was designed by engineer Alan Turing, mathematician, engineer, who was which was a electromechanical device used by British cryptologists to help decipher the German Enigma machine. Turing, who was a genius, unfortunately was gay, and there was a lot of anti-homosexual laws in England at the time. He was convicted. It was very upsetting. He actually committed suicide in 1954. He may have eaten a cyanide-laced apple. Today, there's actually a statue to him in Manchester University, where he studied in Manchester, England. Now, a British cryptologist British engineer by the name of Tommy Flowers in 1944 designed the Colossus. This was the first electronic digital programmable computer. It used a large number of these vacuum tubes that you see here. They're like little light bulbs with all sorts of wiring and little things inside. Sometimes they would burn out like a light bulb and had to be replaced. They were the same things you saw in the back of the television sets. Here's a picture of the Colossus. You can see there's a lot of dials, and it was a massive thing to operate. In 1945, ENIAC, Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, was amongst the earliest electronic general purpose computers made. A little picture here. As you see here, it wasn't something you programmed very easily. A lot of times to change the program around, you had to move cables around, similar to what you see in the back of your TV or a stereo, where you have to unplug and then plug into another jack. So that's how you actually program it. You can see the women here changing the programming. In fact, women were very much involved with it. Women like Kay McNulty, Betty Jennings, Betty Snyder, Marilyn Metzler, Fran Billis, and Ruth Lichterman. They were the first programmers of the ENIAC. Unfortunately, women's work on computers would not be recognized for 50 years. There was a real gender bias against women when it came to computers and math in general. If you ever see the movie Hidden Figures, it shows a lot of that, how men were the ones who were all the engineers and not women. Now, in 1949, the UNIVAC, the Universal Automatic Computer 1, was the first commercial computer produced in the United States. And there it is. It was actually built into a desk. It doesn't actually make it a desktop computer. And you can see there's a keyboard. You didn't actually program it that way, though. To program it, you actually had to put together these punch cards. You would put a blank punch cards into a machine, and then you would type in what you wanted to do for any sort of data. When I was at Northeastern University, I worked in the admissions office, and one of my jobs was to sit at this machine and input data, and it would actually print out these cards. And then the cards would go into a machine, and the machine read these holes and printed out labels for folders, basically just with a potential student's name and social security number. And then we put those onto folders. But it was a big process just to make these labels. So you had to get all these, and sometimes you had stacks of these cards, and you just would input it in, and the computer would read the holes. Now the computer itself looks, kind of small compared to some of the earlier ones, but it did weigh 7.3 tons. It had 5,000 of those vacuum tubes inside, and it took about a half hour just to turn on. So think about that next time you're complaining about your laptop booting up very slowly. Now here we see 5 of those 5,000 tubes, those like little light bulbs that you saw in the back of the computers. They were hot, that's why a lot of these rooms had to be heavily air conditioned. But then they came up with the transistor. The transistor replaced the vacuum tube. It saves space, it's faster, and it just totally revolutionizes the computer industry. They were invented at Bell Telephone Labs in New Jersey back in 1949. Now, giant machines that filled entire rooms could now fit on your desk. The transistor is the key active component in practically all modern electronics, and many people consider it to be one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. Now, during the 1950s, businesses started to embrace the computer industry. One of the first people, a woman, 1959, Grace Hooper, wrote the first software to run computers. She invented what was called Flowmatic. This was the first English word data processing language. We actually used words to process it, not just code. Here we see a picture of her with the UNIVAC. In 1959, her designs led to COBOL. I remember studying this when we were in college. It's an acronym for Common Business Oriented Language, and it's still used today. Hooper once had to remove a moth that somehow got caught in a relay switch and shut down an entire computer. Yeah, you know where we're going, right? It was the term debugging. Oh, come on, that was funny. Someone laughed. All right, now we're going to talk about nuclear power. You remember we dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end World War II. Well, now nuclear power is going to become a new industry, converting atomic energy into electrical power. All right, this is going to be something that is going to be very important. But people were afraid of atomic energy. They had seen the mushroom clouds, pictures of it, that had destroyed 2 Japanese cities. So you can imagine people not ready to embrace having atomic energy in their towns or cities. In fact, they actually brought Walt Disney in to create a TV show called Our Friend the Atom. The movie equated nuclear power with a genie that is only released when it will grant wishes. And there it is. Also this time, the military will use nuclear power and make military vessels nuclear. The first one was in 1954. The U.S. launches a nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Nautilus. It was part of our nuclear fleet. It was retired, I believe it was in 1992. It's up in Groton, Connecticut. It's a museum now. My wife and I got to go on board and walk around and see it. There's also a submarine museum right next to it. So if you ever get it up in Groton, it's really interesting to see. In 1958, the U.S. launches the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, along with other nuclear-powered ships. Here we see a picture of them. The Navy, for this picture here, they got all the sailors out, and they had them all in a formation you can see here to spell out Einstein's theory of relativity, E equals mc squared. The Enterprise was retired in just a few years ago. I think it was 2017, and it's going to be replaced by another nuclear ship that'll be also called the Enterprise. Now, nuclear power is used to make electricity for homes. In 1954, the Soviets built the first world's first nuclear power plant to generate electricity. We came up a few years later, in 1961, the first U.S. commercial nuclear power plant opens in Yankee Row. This is in Row, Massachusetts. It's way out in northwest near the Vermont border. I used to go up to this area in the summer times. My uncle had a house not too far from here. They actually had little boxes near their phones that could transmit a warning if there was a nuclear accident, so that we all knew how to, get out and follow evacuation routes. It never happened. They closed it in 1992, and they dismantled it. This whole building here, all this stuff is actually gone now. Now, by the 1980s, accidents at nuclear power plants made some people distrustful of nuclear energy, as you can imagine. Later, I think it was in 1979, at 3 Mile Island, there was a major accident. And then, of course, in 1986, we have the disaster at Chernobyl in the Soviet Union that made people very much afraid of nuclear power. You have to be very careful. You can't take shortcuts. So, now the last thing we're going to cover is advances in medicine. Now, advances in antibiotics like penicillin saved thousands. Now, it had been discovered by a Scottish scientist, Alexander Fleming, back in 1928. Penicillin was made available to the general public in the United States in 1945. And of course, it's used to, what are some of the things that penicillin is used for?
Bacteria infections.
Yeah, bacteria infections, okay. But probably even more important, in 1954, we have, let me get him up here, there he is. Dr. Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin helped to end polio. Salk's the man with the glasses. He came up with an injection that would kill the virus. He worked out at the University of Pittsburgh. Sabin came a few years later. He came up with an oral thing. I remember when I was in grammar school, our whole first grade class had to go down to the nurse's office, and then we'd go in one by one, and we had to drink this little vial that was the polio vaccination. Polio was terrible. It killed or disabled 20,000 children in the U.S. every year. It usually hit during the summertime. My wife was telling me about how they thought it was waterborne because they closed pools down. They didn't know what caused it, but children would go home for summer vacation, and then possibly, school would open in September, and one of the children would not be there because they died during the summer because of polio. And of course, we know the most famous polio victim was President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who through his March of Dimes program raised a lot of money to help fund the research to end polio. Now, here we see a picture of Dr. Salk inoculating his own son. Big smile there for the photographer, trying to show how safe this was. Mothers were definitely afraid of this disease that attacked their children. And there was a big push to get the U.S. government to create this vaccination for all the children. We see all the kids here smiling. They probably weren't smiling when you got the injection, but they're smiling now because it's going to save their lives. Okay, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.